There's a version of this story where $12 million changes your life for good. This isn't that version. This is the one that actually happens more often than people admit. Nobody stole it from you in one dramatic afternoon. It left in small, reasonable-sounding pieces, and every single piece felt like the right decision at the time. Your father dies in February. You knew he'd done well. A regional chain of auto parts stores he built from one location in 1988 to 11 by the time he retired. You did not know done well meant this. The estate attorney says the number out loud in a conference room with bad lighting, and you ask him to repeat it, not because you didn't hear him, but because you need a second to believe your own ears. $12,140,000 after taxes and fees. You drive home and sit in your car in the driveway for a long time, the way people do in this kind of story. Except this time, it isn't dread. You don't have a word for what it is yet. Month 1, you don't touch it. You're too busy being scared of it. You read that people who receive sudden wealth often go through something researchers actually have a name for, a kind of shock, guilt, and isolation that shows up whether the money came from a lottery ticket or, like yours, from watching your father's heart stop in a hospital hallway. You feel guilty for even thinking about spending it. Then, you feel guilty for feeling guilty. It is exhausting in a way no one warns you about. Month 3, you quit your job as a dental hygienist. It feels like relief for exactly 11 days. Month 4, you buy a house. Cash, no mortgage, 4 bedrooms for 1 person. Because your realtor, a friendly woman named Pam, keeps saying, "You deserve this," every time you hesitate. And eventually, you believe her more than you believe yourself. Month 5, a car. Then a second car for a boyfriend you've been dating for 7 weeks. Month 6, you've spent $900,000 and you genuinely could not tell someone where $400,000 of it went if they asked. You still have $11,200,000. On paper, that number still sounds unspendable. That's the part nobody warns you about. How far away broke still feels when you're standing $11 million from it. Your sister, Renee, got the house in Ohio and $40,000. That was your father's decision, made years before either of you knew there'd be 11 more million behind it. Renee doesn't say much about it at first. Then, slowly, she does. A comment about your new car at Thanksgiving. A joke that isn't really a joke about how some people get everything. A missed call you don't return for weeks because you don't know what to say that won't make it worse. You start sending her money in amounts that feel careful. $2,000 here, $5,000 for her son's braces, hoping the gesture will fix something a spreadsheet never could. It doesn't fix it. It just becomes a new subject you're both careful around. Your cousin Marisol inherited from the same estate, a smaller cut, $110,000. Her share of a life insurance policy your father had kept updated since the 90s. She put $60,000 into an index fund inside a retirement account. She uses $20,000 to pay off her car. She spends the rest, slowly, over 18 months, on things she'd already decided mattered before the money ever arrived. Student loan payments, a kitchen renovation, a trip she'd been saving for anyway. 3 years later, her $110,000 is worth more than she started with. Not because she's a financial genius, but because she never let the number change who she was fast enough to outrun her own judgment. Nobody makes a video about Marisol. There's no story in "she was fine." You don't think about her much during those first 2 years. You will think about her a great deal by the 3rd. Year 2, you meet Gary at your father's old church, the same congregation you grew up in, people who hugged you at the funeral and meant it. Gary tells you he manages money for a few families from church. He talks about your father like he knew him, because he did, a little. He never once asks you directly for money. He waits for you to bring it up, which somehow makes it feel more trustworthy, not less. You hand him $4 million to put to work in what he calls a private real estate fund. Friends and family only, he says, not something he offers to just anyone. There's a real, documented pattern behind exactly this kind of trust. Federal regulators have a name for it: affinity fraud. Schemes that spread specifically through shared community ties, church congregations, military units, tight social circles, because people extend the trust they have for the group to whoever's inside it. You don't check Gary's license. You don't ask for his registration number. He goes to your church. Your father likes him. That feels like enough. For a year, the statements Gary sends look fine. Then the statements stop matching the confirmations you get when you call the actual fund administrator directly on a Tuesday, almost by accident, because a friend mentioned she couldn't reach him either. By the time the fund unwinds, Gary stops answering, then a lawyer letter arrives instead of him. Most of the $4 million is simply gone. Not stolen in one dramatic wire transfer, distributed across bad, undocumented, sometimes fabricated positions that regulators later describe in a single line of a filing as commingled with personal expenses. That's $7,400,000 remaining after the house, the cars, the gifts to Renee, and now this. Except it isn't, because the house needs a new roof, the second car needs its transmission replaced, and you've been covering your ex-boyfriend's rent for 4 months out of a habit that started when it felt generous and became something you didn't know how to stop. Year 3 starts at just under $1 million. It ends after a lawsuit against Gary that recovers 11 cents on every dollar he took, an IRS bill for capital gains you didn't realize you owed on assets Gary liquidated without telling you, and a slow 18 months of a lifestyle that never fully adjusted downward at $4,100, and a rent payment due in 5 days. You go back to hygiene school for a 2-day recertification course because your license lapsed during the 2 years you didn't work. Sitting in a folding chair in a strip mall classroom, you do the math on what happened, the way you've done it 100 times since, and it never once adds up to a single mistake. It adds up to 20 reasonable-sounding decisions made by someone who'd never been taught what $12 million actually requires of a person, made worse by exactly the kind of guilt and trust researchers have been documenting in people like you for 30 years. You think about Marisol's kitchen renovation. You think about the 4 seconds it took to say yes to Gary in a church hallway. The money didn't ruin you. The speed did. So the real question was never how much you inherited. It's how long you think any of us would actually last if the number arrived before the skill needed to wield that number does.